He's also a Fox News contributor and author of the new book, Courage and Consequence. Karl, it's a pleasure. Welcome to Freedom Watch. When you were advising President Bush in the White House, you as well and he as well were confronted with media that wanted to leak information. What did you do when confronted with that? Did you negotiate with them? Did you deal with them? Or did you pretend they didn't exist?
Well, no. In the instance, for example, of the newspapers revealing some of the sources and methods of intelligence, there were extensive negotiations over a number of months to convince the New York Times and, in another instance, the Washington Post not to publish information that would put Americans at risk or put these programs at risk. And in the case of the New York Times, we utterly failed. They basically revealed to Al-Qaeda that we were listening to their intercepting their electronic communications, that their cell phones, satellite phones, and internet communications, that we were able, through a series of very sophisticated methods, to be able to detect their messages. And of course, this shut down important sources of information.
In this WikiLeaks case, would the New York Times have any interest in trying to make the White House look good?
You know, hard to say. I mean, you know, I frankly, the head of WikiLeaks is not a particularly credible source in my mind. He is a, you know, in my mind, he's a criminal, and he ought to be hunted down and grabbed and put on trial for what he has done here. He has put at risk the lives of Afghanis who have given information to both the Afghan and U.S. and coalition forces about Al-Qaeda and Taliban. And there are Taliban and Al-Qaeda, I'm convinced, going over these documents and identifying the villages and the people that gave this information, and there will be blood on this man's hands.
But you remember the Pentagon Papers and other Supreme Court decisions saying if it's a matter of public interest, the stealer of the information can be prosecuted, but not the publisher.
Well, I'm not certain he follows into a publisher. I mean, he's a conduit. I mean, he doesn't meet the traditional test of being a media outlet. If he meets the definition of a media outlet, then anybody who's got a blog posting is media and therefore exempt. So I'm not certain he necessarily falls.
An interesting area of the law that we may very well be getting into. What is a media outlet? But if he is a media outlet, he's protected. Obviously, the people that stole the documents are not, and the government presumably is going to go after them. Switching gears to healthcare, how impressed were you with two events this week? A decision by a federal judge in Virginia, which basically said to the Obama administration, I'm not throwing out this Virginia challenge to the individual mandate. There is an argument to be made that Congress overreached. And then a decision by the voters in Missouri, I think it was 70% of them, said to Senator McCaskill and the other Democrats in Missouri, we didn't want this. You shouldn't have voted for it. We'll decide for ourselves what health care we want, and the feds can't make us do it.
Yeah, well, the first one was expected. That is to say, the court decision involving the Virginia case. We knew that these cases had been filed around the country and that they were going to be heard by a federal court. Cuccinelli's brief was particularly well reasoned, I thought. I read it. I thought it was very interesting, even for a non-lawyer like me. It was very interesting, and the judge's opinion is very strong, and so that was expected, that a court would say Virginia has standing in order to for us to consider these very serious questions about whether or not the Commerce Clause extends to the federal government having the power to compel the purchase of something as a condition of being alive.
Right.
So I expected, and I was delighted that happened. I got to tell you, I'm blown away by Missouri's decision, by Missouri's vote on Tuesday. Even after a couple of days have passed, I'm still, you know, this is an astonishing. First of all, step back for a minute. I'm sort of a numbers guy.
Right.
This is a very large turnout. I mean, 884,000 people voted 6 years ago when there were some contested primaries in the state. This year, there were really no contested primary for United States Senate, which was the big statewide race on the ballot. The Republican nominee was pretty well set. The Democratic nominee pretty well set. So there was no reason to come out. And 939,000 people turned out to vote. 939,000. That is the largest non-presidential year turnout in the history of Missouri. And 71% of them voted for Proposition C, this ballot proposition attacking Obama.
All right, I know what you're going to tell me, Karl. You're going to tell me Missouri is a bellwether state. It usually thinks the way the rest of the country does.
Absolutely. Now, look, 578,000 Republicans turned out to vote. 316,000 Democrats turned out to vote in the Senate primaries. What's interesting is if you look at the numbers, and if you assume every no vote on C came from a Democrat, then at least 45,000 Democrats voted yes on C, voted against Obamacare, and probably closer to 60,000 of them did. And then there were 40,000 people who turned out to vote not because they wanted to vote in the primary for the United States Senate, but because they wanted to turn out and vote against Obamacare.
I want to ask you about federalism because you're a student of history. Do Virginia and Missouri have the right to attempt to nullify the federal mandate, as Cuccinelli is attempting to do, and as the Attorney General of Missouri will soon attempt to do?
Well, the term nullification or nullify has a lot of different meanings. If you mean in the sense of the of Hayes' attack upon the tariff of abomination in the 1828 to 1833.
I mean when the federal government legislates in an area obviously not given to it by the Constitution, can the states tell the feds to take a hike?
If they do so in a way that honors the system, which is exactly what Cuccinelli is doing, which is to say files a lawsuit in federal court challenging the constitutionality of the law, or in the case of Missouri, the people of the state supporting a referendum which directly challenges the law.
Got it.
You bet absolutely. I think Missouri made a very smart move here because, like Virginia, which passed a law saying we do not want to force our people to comply with Obamacare, it gives them now standing to file a lawsuit. Whether the Attorney General of the state of Missouri is going to file a lawsuit or not, he has to this point been resistant.
Can Montana file a lawsuit against the Patriot Act because he thinks it violates the Fourth Amendment by letting federal agents write their own search warrants?
Well, I believe that every state has, in fact, any individual should have access to the courts. I'm not certain I agree with every challenge. I certainly agree with the challenge to the Obamacare on the individual mandate. I don't see that commerce in the Commerce Clause or in the taxing authority of the United States.
Karl Rove, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining.